make a motion to approve the January 10th minutes.
Second.
Okay, and Charlie seconds. All right. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you. All right, informational items. Anything from you, Harry, on updates?
So, yeah, a couple things. I think we had sent Brad and staff a summary. Last week, the House Public Works and Transportation Committee released the outline of their 5-year reauthorization for the highway and transit, federal highway and transit programs. And it was an outline, it wasn't the actual legislation, so as anything, the devil in the details. But it was a good document related to transit. It would provide $105 billion over 5 years for transit, which is a significant increase over the last 5-year period. The outline would prioritize new capital investment grant projects, specifically those focused on reducing congestion and mitigating greenhouse gases, which I know is a priority for the board, so that's good news. They would invest heavily in additional electric buses, low-no, zero-emission buses, which I know is important to you all as you recapitalize the fleet. They would increase bus funding, bus and bus facilities grant funding, and also try and smooth the procurement process so it goes a little faster and smoother for the transit agencies. It would prioritize formula funding and base it more on service frequency, which I know is something you all are trying to do, so I think that's a good provision too. And it would provide resources for bus lanes and signal priority route optimization. So those are things I know that most transit agencies, including PSTA, are focused on. And Chairman DeFazio, who's from Oregon, said in his comments when he released the package that he really wants to try and find ways to improve and reform the operation of transit, particularly bus systems. And so, given that you all are focused on buses, I think that's a good thing. Naturally, the devil also is in the details of how to pay for this. A separate committee has to figure out how they're going to pay for the next 5-year highway authorization bill. Without any action, there'll be more than $1 billion in debt because the gas tax is just not keeping up with the demand for federal transit funds and highway funds. So they're trying to figure out whether to raise the gas tax, whether to come up with a new formula for vehicle miles traveled, or some combination of other pay-fors. And the House Ways and Means Committee held its first hearing last week on that issue also. So more to come on all of that. On the Senate side, the Senate actually has a bill that they reported out on the highway part of the package. It does not include transit. The separate committee has to do that, and they have their first hearing on February 25th on the Senate. The Senate Banking Committee handles the transit side. So that's a good news that they're moving the process along. And in that regard, I don't know if Brad might want to talk about it. He received an invitation this week to talk by phone with the Senate committee staff to talk through some issues and priorities related to transit funding. And so that's, I think, scheduled to take place in the next few days, which will be great because it'll be before the Senate hearing on the 25th. So that's all good news there. A couple other quick points on the federal side. The president will release his budget request for the fiscal year 2021 on Monday morning, February 10th. That's next Monday. So that'll kind of kick off the appropriation season for the next year. So that's an important date. We'll get you more information on what he recommends on funding for transit programs when it comes out Monday. One other thing of interest to you that follow Congress is there continues to be discussion here about bringing back the process, the programs known as earmarked congressional spending. The House chair of the Appropriations Committee had a series of discussions with Democrat members last week to try and gauge support on that. She said on Monday that she would make a recommendation to the House on whether to bring them back or not, make that recommendation by the end of this week. So we'll know more about that going forward. As you know, that was back in the earmark days, the PSTA benefited considerably from both facilities and buses in that period. So there's still hope that maybe they will bring them back in some shape or form. So we'll let you know how that goes. But that's pretty much, I'm happy to answer any questions, but that's pretty much what's going on up here.
You're the chair.
Harry, good morning. This is Commissioner Long. Did you say that there was a separate committee established to study the funding mechanisms for transit going forward?
Yes, so in the House and the Senate, the actual financing mechanisms for the highway and transit programs are actually dealt with by, in the House, the Ways and Means Committee, and in the Senate, the Finance Committee. They're the folks that generate revenue, raise taxes in both the House and the Senate. So what happens is the Transportation Committee in the House reports out the outlines of the programs they want to fund, and then the Ways and Means Committee figures out how to pay for it. In the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee does the highway part of the bill. The Senate Banking Committee does the transit part of the bill, and the Senate Finance Committee then figures out how to pay for all the things that they want to do. So Congressman Neal has been meeting with the Secretary of the Treasury. He's the chair of the House Ways and Means Committee. They've had some discussions over the last 2 weeks about funding options, and I just read today that they're going to continue those meetings this week and next week. So the hope is to find a way to pay for all this.
Can you please keep us very informed on the progress they make on those two committees, the Ways and Means in the House and Finance in the Senate? Because I was in a meeting yesterday where the topic about funding highway miles traveled might be a real alternative to focusing on the gas tax, and I think that both at the state and local levels, that's something we're all wrestling with, and it would be really interesting just to kind of try to work hand in glove with what they all decide up there. Because you know, all that stuff flows downhill.
Yes, it does. So yeah, no, we'll be sure. It's an important discussion, so I'll let you know how it goes.
Thank you very much. Anybody else?
I don't know who else is on there.
No questions? No comments? Nothing?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Harry, this is Joe again. Obviously quite premature, but assuming we can get this rolling, how is the money then allocated to the states and or directly to entities such as PSTA? So we can figure out some amount of funding that we can count on.
So you get, I don't know if Debbie's in the room or not. I mean, Debbie can talk about some of the funding for transit programs comes on an allocation to transit authorities based on a variety of factors, including population, ridership, and all of those. Debbie can probably give you the list of those. So some of the money for your regular operations will come by formula from the federal government. The other funds are competitively awarded, like the Capital Investment Grant Program, kind of like what you're applying for now for the Central Avenue BRT. Those are applications to FTA. They're reviewed and they make funding decisions from those. The Bus and Bus Facilities Grant, the Low-No Bus Program, the Build Act, those are all discretionary and competitive programs. So there's a call for proposals every year. And one just came out earlier in late January for the Bus and Bus Facilities Grant Program and the Low-No Grant Program. So those are things that the PSTA will apply for. Been very successful in the past at getting funded, and I'll apply for it that way.
Okay.
But the good news is, if the pot is bigger for funds, then there's obviously more funds to go towards your allocation and also for the competitive awards.
Okay, great, thank you.
Anyone else? Dan?
Nope, I have nothing.
Brad, you did something?
Well, yeah, I just wanted to sort of embellish on what Harry just said. As you know, it's like a two-step dance where there's the authorization process, which sets the policy, and then it is great that the Senate Banking Committee staff reached out to us, and unfortunately it wasn't on funding. I would like to advise the U.S. Senate on how they should fund transit better, but no, they're not asking for our advice on that. They're just asking for our advice on transit partnerships with Uber and Lyft, the TNCs, and how, which is also exciting, but money is more exciting. I know that we're very hopeful. It's on our legislative priorities to have the next authorization bill enable all of the funding formulas that Commissioner Barclay just asked about to count transportation rides that ride on Uber and Lyft. which the formulas currently do not count because they were not transportation modes when the formula was created back in 1970 something, 76, I think. So hopefully the call with Senate banking will yield some positive results. I know that I guess the Democratic side is a little skittish about Uber's ulterior motives. So it seems like these discussions about the TNCs always have us defending the TNCs, which I don't really like to do, but they are helping us connect in other ways. So on that, and then on the BRT specifically, just a quick update. As you know, we have essentially completed all of basically everything that we need need to do locally. We're at 100% design. The bid documents are being put together. Al's getting ready to put it out to bid for the construction of the BRT. We've already ordered the vehicles. There is something. It's called a letter of no prejudice that more and more transit system cities are doing across the country these days, where you have to go through this whole little mini process to get the feds to agree to allow you to spend your own money on the project, so that when they give you the money, you can be reimbursed later. And we will probably submit that documentation just to cover ourselves sometime later this spring for a letter of no prejudice, basically authorization that the project can move forward if we want to with our own money while waiting on the feds. But we already got such a letter for the County Beach Park construction that's starting right now. And it's pretty normal these days for almost every city for these BRT projects or even the rail projects to get these, because there's just a slowdown in DC on the mechanics of just getting the money out. I mean, Congress has approved all this money, but it's not flowing very smoothly. So we're kind of in a waiting period right now. We are waiting on what's called an allocation announcement, and hopefully maybe the president's budget will trigger that by the DOT, that our project will be allocated its funding. I mean, Commissioner Long had a great call with the FTA administrator before Christmas, and everybody seems like we're just waiting on them. And then that allocation announcement will not be just for our project, it'll be for projects that the administration wants to move forward all across the country. That will then get things into gear then. And there's a very strict defined process after that announcement is made to then get a grant agreement. And that's where the big golf check comes. You know, the check for $22 million will come and we'll be off and running. So I talked to Harry yesterday about possibly some trips to Washington, D.C. when they make sense this spring. And so we'll be getting with you, the legislative committee, on those visits as well. As he mentioned, there's also the discretionary grants that we are meeting internally to come up with a plan on how we want to best pursue those. The one project that I know Commissioner Albritton, who's here, is interested in, the Clearwater terminal. I don't believe the build grants have been announced, but they will be announced any minute also by the feds. And we can be more competitive if we get local community support. And I know we'll get great support for that project from Clearwater, but all of the projects, to the extent that we're going to try to do a better job of just getting letters of support in other ways that we can support these applications to the feds, because they're very, very competitive. You know, I was watching some of the HART board meetings lately, and their board is talking about how they can be more competitive, and they're very jealous of all the money. Every time Pinellas wins, they note it.
We're meeting this tomorrow, right? Oh.
Friday. And then we get jealous too. Hi. When they get approved. So good news is both Hart and PSTA got human trafficking training grants, which was good.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay, let the record reflect that Gina Driscoll has just come in. And Harry, is there any value in chit-chatting with Jane again now to see what the time frame is? Because when I talked to her in December, she indicated that in the first couple of months of this year, we'd probably get the check.
Yeah, I think what Brad and I talked about yesterday was the president's budget comes out Monday, so there should be a list of projects in that bill, the prospective projects that would be funded over the course of the next year. So I think what Brad and I talked about, let's see what comes out with the president's budget, make sure that the BRT is on that list, and then maybe use that as the jumping off point to re-engage again with Jane Williams and her staff.
Yeah.
Is that good, Brad?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. Abhishek, who's not here, his thought was once we get the allocation announcement, we don't want there to be any kind of delay or they forget about us. So that's the opportune time where we go to DC or talk to Administrator Williams and just keep them very top of mind that Pinellas is a great place and that they work
yeah.
on that.
Commissioner Justice has a comment or question?
So, just Harry, the allocation list that you say is coming out next week, it's a lump sum for BRT projects, and then we have to go to a second level to get approval, or will we actually be on the list specifically?
So what it is it's actually a list of projects. The Federal Transit Administration has a list of projects. In fact, when we were up there with Jane Williams a couple of months ago, she actually pulled out the list, and you can see there, I think, Brad, 50-some projects on the list. What they do is they include in the budget request those projects that are moving through the process, and so that kind of gives the Congress an expectation of what projects they expect to be funded over the course of the next year. So once we make sure that the BRT project's on there, don't have any doubt it will be on there, and see what notes are on there, that'll be the jumping off point. They still need to make an allocation then, as Brad said. They need to say, we're reserving $22 million for this project. That'll be the next step, and then the step after that will be developing a funding agreement, the documents that you sign. Once that's done, then they'll actually, as Brad said, release the big check, the $22 million. So there are a couple steps to go, but you're working through the process. This is not a competitively awarded program where you will win and somebody else will lose. It's you work through the process, and as you check off the box, the funding will become available to you. Is that a good synopsis, Brad?
Yeah.
So Harry, just FYI, so we're all on the same page, in the conversation I had with her in December, she actually pulled out the sheet because I made the comment of, hey, all those 9 things that we needed to do to get clearance to go forward, we've accomplished them now. So can you please double check to make sure your page is showing that? And she pulled it out and she said, oh, I'm so proud of you all. There's nothing left for you to do. So I did a, whoopee dance on the phone. Yeah, so we should be good.
Yep.
Exciting.
You talked about local support. We've got all the cities now, at least some level of support with the project.
On the BRT?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think I think certainly I've had a number of conversations with individual mayors and city officials, very positive about us moving forward. That thanks to the county's partnership agreement on using the County Beach Park, that's been a real success. So I think things are pretty good right now.
Okay. Good.
Anything else on the federal before you move to the state?
Anything else, Harry?
Nope, that's what I have.
All right, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Who's on from RSA?
You have Ron and myself. This is Natalie.
Hey there, good morning.
Morning.
Hey, Commissioner Allen. Allen's on as well.
Nice to hear from you, Alan. Thanks for being here. what's going on?
So if you want, we'll go first and kind of give you a quick update of what's on our agenda. Let me start with T-BARDA. Madam Chair, we know that T-BARDA is important to us, was on our agenda last year. There's legislation moving relating to the Enabling Act for T-BARDA. It did move yesterday. It's moved for in the Senate last week. Should be able to get in the Senate next week. It moved yesterday for the first time in the House. We expect it to be up, if not next week, the following week. Basically, it's down to three things. Number one, it clarifies what a quorum is, changes the definition of what a quorum is. So it takes that sentence was giving us some heartburn from a T-BARDA standpoint, and we moved that. It does allow the city, the mayors to be able to appoint a designee from the respective city councils. It needs to be the same person, and that person must be voted upon as the alternate by that respective city council. Then the last thing that it does is removes reference to all of the committees that's in statute to allow T-BARDA the ability to define what their own, all of their own committees and the processes for those committees, including that they took the CCC and put the CC back over under the MPOs, what we talked about. It includes no references to the ability to vote by electronic means. The House and Senate were not going to go for that, so unfortunately we had to kind of punt on that. But the other issues we cared about are on the bill. $1.5 million is in the House budget. We are not in the Senate budget at the moment. The Senate's not going to be the issue, so I think we'll be fine there as we go into conference. So the 1.5 for operating dollars is once again in the House. Again, I think we'll feel confident we'll be able to get back and get into the Senate budget as well. From a PSTA standpoint, let me just highlight a couple of issues. Is number one, transportation disadvantage. In the Senate budget that's going to pass out of Senate appropriations later today, there is funding in there for $4.5 million to go back and make the county whole. As you'll recall, last year when they passed the $4 million for transportation disadvantage, some of the counties, including Pinellas, lost dollars. They're going to put an additional $4.5 million to ensure that funding related to community transportation coordinators will be fully funded. There is no proviso, so right now there's not proviso relating to that. As Alan will tell you, proviso for that will come out later on. We believe that us and other groups are pushing for the, doing quotes, the good proviso that got pulled out last year, so we believe that will be put back in. A couple of bills, Brad's been having his work on the assault and specified persons, which is typically bus drivers, 951 by Representative Beltran, 1460 by Senator Perry. Each of those bills passed to respect the subcommittees or the full committees yesterday. Both of those bills have two additional committees to make it through. I will tell you, Hart is pushing that bill. Hart had a press conference a couple of weeks ago, and we reached out, and we were there on behalf of PSTA supporting them. It was Natalie actually stood as a part of the press conference, so we're supporting those two bills and as they move through the process. Brad's actually going to be in Tallahassee next week. He's up for the Transit Association Day, their day on Hill. We've got a couple of meetings scheduled. One scheduled, we've got ACA Secretary Mayhew. Thank you, Alice, for helping with that. Going to talk about some of these Medicaid trips we're not getting reimbursed for, so we'll have a conversation with her. And then we're also setting up a meeting, which should be scheduled today or tomorrow, with DEP to follow up with VW settlement and kind of where we are in the RFQ and that process as we move forward. We do have a second trip for PSTA to come up March 3rd and 4th, which is actually pretty good timing because by then House and Senate budgets will be done. We're kind of getting geared up for conference, and so it's a good time to make sure we talk about proviso and talk about some of the other budget issues that we care about from a transportation disadvantage standpoint. So I'll stop there. Brad, let me know if I missed anything, but we're glad to answer any questions. Alan, also, anything I missed on your end you wanted to highlight? No, I think you pretty much touched on all of it. The only thing I know we have talked about some of the late shift Uber stuff funded by the MCORS funding. I know there's some back of the bill language to reappropriate some of that money, but I think the majority of that will probably be handled at the leadership level after we kind of get off the floor.
But there is some additional conversation going on about that. But I think that the bigger pots of money to do some of that stuff will mostly come later. But I think that was the only other thing that I had to add.
Ron, this is Commissioner Long, and I have a couple of questions. Clarification, please, on the opportunity for the two mayors to delegate a person to sit in their place. Is that specific to they nominate or delegate an elected official within their city?
Yes, ma'am, it has to be a member of the respective city council, and that city council then has to vote for that person to be the official alternate on behalf of the city council for the mayor cannot attend the meeting. Yes, ma'am.
And then my second question is, with the 1.5 that's in the House, is there no opportunity to bump that up when it gets over to the Senate? Because you may remember that the TED committee gave us additional dollars last year to work on studying the new and innovative technologies that were coming on to the radar, and we voted 2 weeks ago, or whatever that was, at our last T-BARTA meeting, to work with, in an interlocal agreement with Joe Lapano at the airport to see how we could build the air taxi system to come to fruition. And so those dollars are going to get eaten up pretty quickly, and how do we keep on moving in that new futuristic way without additional dollars? I'm just asking the question.
I would say, Commissioner, I would say that probably getting additional dollars this will be difficult. The reason they gave us additional dollars last year were there was 2 or 3 specific projects that were asking for dollars. Instead of kind of become the referee of who they give money to and who they do not, they kind of gave the dollars to us to be the referee. I actually asked a specific question of Chairman Hudson and said, are there any additional folks looking for money out of the Tampa Bay area that, the dollars could flow through us? And the answer was no. I asked about trying to get, and I think Alan had a conversation as well, trying to get some additional dollars above the 1.5. And I think this year the 1.5 for operating will probably be what we end up with. Doesn't mean we maybe try to get a little bit of sprinkle dollars from, President Galvano at the end, but right now the plan is for the 1.5. But we can remind them that, from a PD&E standpoint, we're working on some of these other projects that could be potentially ready for a phase 2 next year and beyond.
Yeah, and I just to echo Ron, in all those conversations, there are certainly additional dollars at the end of session. We all know that, and we're certainly going to continue to have those conversations. But there are some tighter constraints in that budget area this year than there have been in the past. I can tell you that Chairman Hudson didn't get to fund many of the projects, even in his region that he wanted to fund. So, and how we talk about it, and the other conversation that we're continuing to have, which is always difficult. We all know that. I would just caution everyone, but not only additional dollars, but trying to turn some of this into recurring is an additional leadership conversation that we'll continue to have, but is always a difficult task up here. But both of those things are certainly still on the agenda, not being pushed off, but just a kind of a cautious outlook for the remainder of session.
Okay, so listen, I get why it's difficult and all the reasons why it's probably not going to happen. I do know that you don't get if you don't ask, and I just want to put it on your radar that we're working on those air taxis. We've got Hyperloop coming down the pike, the cable propelled transit, and now the ferries are coming into play. Not, the little ferries that use waterborne transportation. So I do think there's a value in keeping that on the top of the conversation of what's coming along, because we're not always going to be stuck where we are today, I would like to think.
No, absolutely. Into Alan's point, by the way, about the recurring conversation, we've started that conversation already too, about we can't come back every year and keep looking for non-recurring revenue for T-BARTA. It's just not going to work.
Well, eventually,
about including the dollars as part of the base budget for DOT. That conversation's been started. We've already talked to the DOT Secretary for District 7 about it. He's very open in the conversation. I think we talked to the DOT Secretary Tebow after this and have a conversation with him directly. Having a longer runway to 2021, I think will allow us, number one, to, I think from an operating standpoint, make sure the T-bar is shored up, but more importantly, some of these other projects, you get a better understanding what the timelines look like, and try to get additional funding on the horizon for those as well. So your points are well taken.
Thank you.
And just to build on, and Commissioner, just to build on what Ron said and your points about how we build this argument, one of the other conversations that we've continued to remind folks is that right now we've been very blessed the last 2 years and probably the next 2 years with leadership from our area. There's going to come a time in the House and Senate when, the Tampa Bay elected officials won't necessarily hold those gavels in either of the house, either of the chambers. And, there's a concern there of, well, if we're just coming back for non-recurring dollars every year, that becomes an issue when someone's on leadership. And so I think trying to get current leadership to ensure our future success is certainly an argument that we've built with them. And I think that's helping along, obviously along with all of your points of the project. So.
Gotta make hay while the sun shines.
That's right. One additional update, well, we've been on the phone in real time. Brad, you're meeting with DEP next week at 4 o'clock on the 11th. We'll
Great.
send you a notice.
Okay, great. Just one comment on the recurring funding or just generally funding. The problem with, as you know, the $1.5 million that T-BARTA got last year for their operations came from existing grants that PSTA and HART had already received. So the money, it was not new money that T-BARTA got. It came out of our hide and HART's hide. Now, good news for us, it was from an old grant that we were not using anyway. In HART's case, I think they were actually using it. But to me, it seems like maybe a better strategy is one that Whit Blanton has been really touting, which I think is a great idea, to allow more flexibility within DOT for their $11 billion in other funds to be used however the local governments want it. I know it's kind of a antithesis of what Tallahassee usually tries to do and allow the locals to decide for themselves on what they should do, but there seems to be a little bit of movement where they're allowing the district offices, like the Tampa Bay district office, would have more flexibility on how they use all of their money, all of their transportation money, however, the MPOs and the locals want to use it. If because it's our region that wants, to have a strong regional T-BARTA. It should just be up to the locals if they want that or not. And then that way, maybe it doesn't have to come out of, it's not just moving the shells around it's more, it would be a better long-term strategy for T-BARTA and for the whole, and us and everybody. I don't know.
Yeah, Brad, this is Alan. I can tell you that is definitely a conversation that's happening in Tallahassee, mostly based on exactly what you mentioned about last year. In the past, DOT has had, let's call it extra money from who knows where. And so when these projects were put in the budget as line items that weren't necessarily in a work plan somewhere, they were just kind of funded and dealt with. And DOT has now come back and said that that's not an option anymore. And so they've, like you said, they've kind of started picking from other projects. I know HART was not very happy with their project being canceled. I ran into them. They were actually in the chairman's office right before I was, and he was pretty clear that that's what they were in there about. And so I think that's a broader conversation in Tallahassee about who has the, if DOT has a work plan, but the legislature is still the appropriating. So there's a little bit of a power struggle that's way above our pay grade, but it's definitely a conversation on the future. Is this work plan, 5-year work plan for a $10 billion program really the way to do it if the legislature is going to exercise its authority in the way they do? So I think it takes some time to really flesh out, but it's definitely something that within the transportation kind of world of the legislature that those leadership folks are really beginning to take a hard look at. So I think we may see some changes, or at least see some opportunities to have some conversations in the near future.
And then my other question for you, Alan, was did you say that there is some discussions about taking some of the MCOR's money that is being allocated to the Transportation Disadvantage Program and taking it away to do other fun things with? And
No. What I said was they were reappropriating the money, so there was leftover money from last year.
yeah,
So in the back of the bill, they'll so they don't have the spending authority to necessarily spend it. So we have back of the bill provisions for situations like that. And essentially what they do is just roll the money over for the same purpose. And it's just kind of a catch-all to make sure they have the continued authority to spend it on what they were previously. It doesn't change the appropriation or the purpose. It just kind of gives them another year to spend the money. And again, it doesn't, I think a lot of that is yet to be fleshed out. Those are usually leadership issues, especially if it's an MCORs, and that's obviously President Galvano's issue. But there is a provision in the back of the bill that allows them to roll that over. That was my only comment. So the unspent funds for the same purpose.
okay.
Anything else from anyone? Okay, guys, good job. Keep on going.
Okay, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Have a good week.
You too, bye-bye. What else?
Well, I know that I believe every single person that is sitting at this table has been to Tallahassee recently, and I didn't know if anyone else had heard anything while they were up there related to transportation. But if you had, I'd be very interested in what you've heard. As you mentioned, next week when I'm up there for the State Association meeting, I'm meeting with Secretary Mary Mayhew, who is the Secretary over ACA, which oversees Medicare and Medicaid, and to talk about this issue where the brokerage system that the state has set up to save money on Medicaid makes it almost impossible for Medicaid recipients to actually use. And so instead they give up and they just call DART, and then PSTA taxpayers pay for it instead of Medicaid. When we met with, I know when some of you and I were up there meeting with Senator Roussan, he had some questions about Secretary Mayhew, whether she would be listening or not, but we'll see. And then the other issue is just on the VW settlement funds that are sitting up there in Tallahassee in the DEP, and that's more of a just listening to them and hearing what their process that they're developing to make sure we're as competitive as possible for that funding. At the State Association meeting, the main issue is related to transportation disadvantage funds. The Commission for Transportation Disadvantage has issued a rule that so far doesn't affect PSTA, but it's significantly affecting lots of other systems, including Miami-Dade and Broward, where they've said that transportation disadvantage dollars cannot be used where there's bus systems, where there's bus systems, or and the ADA zones, ADA Americans with Disability Act, 3/4 of a mile around bus systems that we provide paratransit. So, if taken literally, that would eliminate the ability for us to use transportation disadvantage dollars in Pinellas County, because our ADA zone covers the entire county. They're taking something like $4 million away from Miami-Dade. They're taking that away from them. Broward, they're taking a couple of $1 million away, and then so the state transits are very upset about this, and have gotten the feds to write a letter saying that they can't do this, but they're still doing it. So we're going to talk about what we can do as a state to convince the Commission for Transportation Disadvantage that they shouldn't do this. It's more of a it's not affecting PSTA now, but it might affect PSTA in the future. One issue which I need to learn more about is the Commission for Transportation Disadvantage is an appointed board of citizens around the state. I don't know if the governor or who appoints them, but the one representative from the Tampa Bay region passed away. And there's nobody. The closest member of the board that is to us is from Orlando. And I don't know if she's up for it. I was thinking Patty Johnson would be an awesome person that we could somehow nominate to be on there. I don't know how the thing works. Or
Why don't you ask her if she has someone that she could recommend?
Who, Patty? Oh, yeah.
That's a good idea. I mean, she's been so sick.
Yeah.
I know.
I think it would be a lot of
I've heard
pressure
some
on
more
her.
positive news though. But
Well, I
anyway,
mean,
just
ask her
trying to get
whether-
a Tampa Bay
If she,
person.
if she can't do it, she would probably know someone who might be interested, since she works so much in that arena.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Something that can only help us if we have a representative on that committee. Okay, well, that's all I have.
It is a governor's appointment.
What?
It's a governor's?
It's a governor's appointment, that board.
Okay.
So we could make a suggestion?
I'm sorry?
We
Is
could
that
make
what
a
you do?
suggestion, though, to the governor's office on an
We
appointment?
can, but
The
he's so
webpage.
far behind on his appointments that
Yeah. I wonder if.
we don't even have our appointments to T-BARTA or the Regional Planning Council yet. And he's been there now, what, couple of years? 2 years?
What do you?
2 years we don't have our appointments.
Does T-BARTA and the Regional Planning Council make recommendations to the governor's office and? or-
We've tried, but they don't take any action on them.
No.
I don't know what their hang-up is. Obviously, they don't. But our last governor did the same thing. I mean, he left office without ever filling all of his appointments.
I wonder if, in the meantime, since clearly this won't happen quickly, maybe if we reach out to the Orlando person
Yes.
and
Well, we are
since
trying
that
to
is the
connect with them.
closest person to us, and we do share some of the same challenges and needs as Orlando's
No, yeah.
system does. So if that's what we've got right now, I say let's try to develop that relationship so that perhaps they can represent us, at least to some extent,
Yeah.
on that.
By the way, next Tuesday is Florida Transportation Disadvantage Day at the Capitol.
I know. It's a massive celebration. That's why I'm going there.
And it's legislative week for the Florida League of Cities. It's going to be packed. You going, Bill? It's too packed.
Well, I know that the transportation disadvantaged folks give out breakfast sandwiches in the
Oh, wow.
in the courtyard there.
Oh, good.
Incentive.
So the
That's
League of
it.
Cities
That's
can
right.
enjoy
Yeah, I
that.
like food.
Okay, well, since there doesn't seem to be any other business, is there any other business for the good of the order?
Move for adjournment?
Do we have a second? Second. Then we are adjourned, and thank you
All
very
right.
much for your time
Great
and
meeting.
thoughtfulness.
All right.
Very good, thank you. Thank you, Brad, thank you, everyone.
So
Linda,
I'm going to start testing this new thing. We need to make sure this happens, and I have to,
So we might see
I'm sure it
something.
does work, but I just to make sure that when nothing's popping up and I have to add agenda
How are
items,
you?
Good, how are you?
it still triggers
How used to seeing you
timestamp.
more casual.
Yeah.
Agenda.
I wanted to come keep
Yes,
listening
it
to
will.
legislatively. About to go up there next month.